You know, out of every ranking I've made on this channel, this was by far the hardest one to decide on. This game's iconography spans almost 2 decades at this point. How does one begin to define what is its most famous and well-known weapon? This video was originally just conceived as kind of a silly top 10 ranking, yet the more I thought about it, the more I thought I should probably take this a bit more seriously. In doing so, however, I had set myself a Herculean task which would end up taking up weeks of my life in terms of researching official Valve media, asking around with other TF2 players, and generally just reviewing in-game and online statistics. But with that all being said, if I were to make a ranking of what TF2's most iconic weapons were, what would it look like? Well, hopefully it would look something like this. So deciding what TF2's most iconic weapon was not an easy task, as I had to consider not only what TF2 players would say, but also what those outside of the community would say. Something like the Conniver's kunai, for example, is a very common sight in game, yet it hardly appears in any official Valve media, so someone outside of TF2's influence might not know it exists, which probably severely hurts its chances at being the most iconic spy weapon. What? What? I'm sorry, I don't think I gave you permission for that. I'm very sorry, sir, but I think I wanted you dead. So, in order to gauge influence as to what is and what isn't an iconic weapon, if the weapon, for example, appears in one of the Meet the Team videos, or if the weapon, for example, is easily accessible within Gary's mod or SFM, it has a much higher chance of being on this list than a weapon that has neither. If it's easily referenceable in conversational memes, or say for example if it's made a cameo or reference in another game, that also means the weapon is much more iconic and has a much higher chance of appearing on this list. So, with all this criteria out of the way, how this video is going to work is that I will be covering the most iconic weapon for each class in no particular order, along with 3 honourable mentions. And then the final 10th position at the end of the video is the weapon that takes my cake for the most iconic within the entire game. And please bear in mind that not all of these choices have come from me, as I have done what feels like hours worth of research into online statistics and weapon usages, and asked countless numbers of players for their opinion on the subject. So with all that being covered, why don't we just begin? Please subscribe if you're enjoying this video so far and you'd like to see like-minded content, and let's get into it.
If you know what's good for you, you will run!
So, I'm going to start this video off with Soldier, as I feel this should be a pretty uncontended choice, as I believe Soldier's most iconic weapon is number 10, the rocket launcher. Yeah, this one seemed pretty obvious from the start, purely because of one thing that you and I both know and maybe can do to moderate varying levels: rocket jumping. Rocket jumping is probably the single most iconic thing about TF2. Just the sheer crazy idea of an American propelling himself forward in the air by using high yield explosives is insanely funny, yet at the same time it's such a complex and sophisticated mechanic that it takes years to master. But obviously, this isn't a ranking of the most iconic mechanics in TF2, this is a ranking of the most iconic weapons. And even with that in mind, I still believe the rocket launcher is Soldier's most iconic weapon. But hey, if the rocket jumping is the most iconic thing about Soldier, then why don't we make the first honourable mention the rocket jumper? The rocket jumper was really a solidifying act in defining a new era of Soldier playstyles, specifically the Trolldier, which is why my second honourable mention is of course the Market Gardener. I really don't need to explain why the Market Gardener is on this list, however I will tell you that in the original draft of this script I had this in the first place for the most iconic thing about Soldier, but my community eventually talked me out of it. And then the final slot on the honourable mentions for Soldier was a toss-up between either the direct hit or the gunboats, and I really love the direct hit, and I really hate the gunboats. But I don't think I can let my feelings get in the way of facts. I think the gunboats are more iconic than the direct hit. Anyone who knows me knows I hate these things so much, and I hate the people who use them so much. But at the end of the day, egotistical tryhard roamers are much more common than just direct hit soldiers, so I have to reluctantly give this position to the gunboats.
You're all a bunch of no-hopers!
Now when I say sniper, what normally comes to mind? Professionalism? Standards? Efficiency? Urine? Yes, with a decision that still baffles me 9 years after I initially installed the game for the first time and realised you could get a jar of piss, number 9, the Girardi, has to be the most out of left field thing to ever be added into TF2. I love this thing's inclusion in TF2 so much, as it really solidifies to me that I shouldn't take this game very seriously at all. The Girardi's iconic status comes from a perfect storm of literally everything a sniper could ever want. A way to deal with some of his greatest counters, a way to bolster his personality onto the level of other mercs, and a way to explain away where most of his waste goes when he's sitting out scoping for long periods of time. I don't really have anything else to gush about with the Girardi, I just think it's the second best representation within the entire game of TF2's insane, silly humour and world. Second best, mind you. Now in terms of honourable mentions for sniper, I guess we have to include the stock sniper rifle on here, and I'm going to give the opinion that this is the best to worst looking stock weapon, as the sight is just so big, Why is the scope so big? I mean, the rest of the weapon looks amazing, but I don't know, I don't like the look of the scope, and I don't like the colours. The second honourable mention, of course, goes towards the Noble Huntsman. Where there's TF2, there's Jank, and where there's Jank, there's Huntsman. And for the final honourable mention, I'm willing to throw in the Razorback just because of its pure brain-dead stupidity. This weapon actively encourages you to not get better at the game and to not get better at countering spies. And I really don't understand what the point in that is. I think overall, Pyro was the second easiest merc to choose an iconic weapon for, as nothing within Pyro's kit could ever come close to number 8 the flare gun in terms of iconism. Just how soldier mains often orientate to the class because of rocket jumping, there have been people out there who have ended up being Pyro mains purely because of flares and the satisfaction you get from landing them. Yes, the ever iconic playstyle known as the Puff and Sting has been a central part of Pyro design for years, and I'd like to take this moment to say, Puff and Sting is absolutely not dead. You see, when Jungle Inferno came out, there was mass panic as there were changes not only to how Afterburn works, but also to the air blast trajectory. Yet, after all this time, I can confidently say that puffing and stinging is just as effective as ever, you just need to get used to the new angles you're working with. Now, I will say that out of most of the choices on this list, this is the one that is mostly influenced by in-game statistics, as yes, of course, the flare gun appears in official Valve media, but the main reason for its list here is that it's just such an iconic staple of Pyro's in-game gameplay, and it has been for such a long time. Whether you're a flare deity who worships the degreaser and the power jack, a new to play Pyro who accidentally just hit his first flare and is still coming down from the adrenaline high, or a scumbag who fakes a terminal illness in order to escape the internet, anyone who's ever picked up the flare gun for more than 5 minutes knows how insanely satisfying it is to land flares, and that's why it has to be on this list somewhere. Now, some people are going to find our first honourable mention a bit funny, but the first honourable mention for Pyro is actually the Rainblower, as the Rainblower kind of represents Pyro vision as a whole, just like with the rocket launcher kind of representing rocket jumping. Plus, as you could probably assume, the Meet the Team videos were a huge influence on this video, and ask anyone what they remember about the Pyro video, and it's the Rainblower in Pyroland. I feel for our second honourable mention, if we're going to include the flare gun, critical bomb burning place, we have to also include the extinguisher, as, wow, this weapon has been through the ringer many times over. I honestly think it's in a fantastic spot as it is currently today, but wow, I remember when this thing was something. And for the final honourable mention, it's kind of again a toss-up between the degreaser and infamy, and in the end I chose infamy. So what do we have when it comes to infamy? We either have the flog or the scorch shot, and I think it has to be the flog.
This here is just gonna keep happening and happening.
Now, something I probably should have specified in the intro yet decided not to purely because it was getting too long was that PDAs will not be considered for this list. No construction PDAs, no destruction PDAs, and no disguise kits. So if we're disallowing buildings for this list, why don't we just pick the thing that's most commonly associated with the buildings? That's why I think number 7, the wrench, is the engineer's most iconic weapon. Show me a Gibbous engineer hitting his sentry with a wrench and I will show you the future of gaming he paved out beneath his feet. The wrench is just such a famous aspect of TF2 and modern day gaming as a whole, as there have been so many turret builders within so many shooters and other games alike that follow a similar format to the engineer. Now obviously Engineer did not invent the idea of a stationary turret that fires at will, but he certainly did popularise it, and I don't think there's any denying that. I really have nothing else to add for this part. I think the wrench is the most iconic engineer weapon, and possibly the second most iconic weapon within the entire game. I'm honestly willing to put it that close. Now when we come to honourable mentions, I feel the Wrangler must receive a shout out, as this is once again another one of those weapons that has defined an era of playstyles with the class. Taking manual control of your buildings whenever you need to is such an invaluable aspect of engineer gameplay, and this weapon is just great. A bit too great actually. Valve, please remove the shield from this thing. Okay, let's see what else we got here. The Gunslinger, yes. So the Gunslinger is once again another one of those playstyle defining weapons that is an absolutely invaluable thing for the engineer to have. Now, the Gunslinger absolutely falls more into the category of infamy, however, infamy plays a huge part in this ranking, as if something is infamous, it is still famous. And now for this final honourable mention slot, I'm willing to hear out what anyone has to say in the comments, yet I'm just going to throw the Golden Wrench in here. I guess another thing I should have added in the intro is that reskins are 100% allowed on this ranking. Like for example, I actually consider the Rainblower to be more iconic than the stock Flamethrower, and the Golden Wrench isn't quite as iconic as the normal wrench, but you absolutely want one, don't deny it.
You're weak, I'm strong, and I win!
It's the Islander. I really dislike this thing a lot, okay? This big chrome cock gobbler is the bane of my existence. I don't really... Okay, so the reason why I dislike the Eyelander is because it is too iconic to nerf, and it will always remain the best Demonite weapon because of that. Having amazing shield recharge is nice, having amazing health on kill is nice, but these are all short-term things. These will eventually wear off, and you'll have to go get some more shield or some more health somewhere else, where the Eyelander's buffs are eternal, and it will always stay that way. I've made an entire video talking about this concept, yet I had to scrap it because... Okay, how do I say this nicely? Demonite mains are very tense people, in my experience. You will, your experiences will differ, and you may disagree, but in my experience they are very, very... I think tense is the word I'm going to use. And I know I could not make a serious video demonstrating my points without just instantly being bombarded with hate by those who haven't even given it 5 minutes. But in case you're wondering, here's a screenshot from what that video would look like. I don't know if anyone here understands Premiere Pro, but yeah, I had to cancel it. Anyway, long story short, the Eyelander is iconic because it defined an era of playstyles pretty much just as well as any other weapon on this list so far, and any other weapon that will come in the future. Honourable mentions have to go, of course, to the Sticky Bomb Launcher. It's my opinion that this is probably one of the most hated weapons in the entire game, and yes, I understand why, but I also think demos who use this get a lot of unfair slack. For the second honourable mention, I had to include a shield, so I've gone with the Charge and Targe as it was the first one added to the game, and therefore the first real Demonite shield, but I'd be happy to hear anyone out with any of the choices here. And for this last one, I'm just going to go with the stock bottle, as I feel this weapon entirely sums up what Demoman is. Scottish.
New gun is unfair to tiny baby enemies.
Heavy was another one of those mercs that was just really easy to decide on. Number 5 has to be his main lady, Sasha. Now, as a Heavy main, I have to discredit the idea that Heavy is one of the shallowest mercs when it comes to personality. I actually think that title belongs to Sniper, because I truly believe that Heavy is just oozing with charm and personality wherever he goes. From naming his weapons to mowing down babies on the battlefield and laughing about it, Heavy relishes in everything he does related to warfare. And the whole reason I'm a Heavy main is because big dumb number and loud noise make happy, and no weapon exemplifies that more than Sasha. This section is going to be one of the much shorter ones in the video, as I really have nothing else to say about Sasha. You know her name, you know what she does, and you know where to find her. Right next to this guy. Now, when it comes to honourable mentions and talking about Sasha, we cannot forget about the Tommy Slug, as this debate has been raging on for over a decade and is still widely unanswered within the eyes of many Heavy mains. Now, for the second honourable mention, it might be a bit more controversial, yet I'm going to give it to the Killing Gloves of Boxing. The whole reason I'm giving it to the Killing Gloves of Boxing instead of something like, for example, the Gloves of Gloving Urgently or the Fists of Steel is because these were the first Heavy melees, and they set the path for what all Heavy melees would end up being. If it weren't for these things, there's a high chance a lot of Heavy's melees wouldn't have been glove-based, and I can't imagine what a world without glove-based Heavy melees looks like. Like, seriously, what would he use, a knife or something? I don't know. And for the final one, we are once again turning to Infamy, as I believe that Natasha should take the third slot, purely because of the amount of people that hate this thing.
The healing leaves little time for the hurting.
Medic has to be one of the best designed healers within all of FPSs, as he's insanely hard to master, yet insanely rewarding. A huge chunk of that challenge, however, comes from knowing when to use your Uber charges, and, well, where else to place Uber charges than with the stock Medigun? So I believe number 4, the stock Medigun, is Medic's most iconic weapon. The Uber update has to have been one of the most game-changing updates that TF2 ever saw. This update not only added a whole new way to play Medic, but also a whole new way to play the entire game. Now, obviously, the stock Medigun is here purely because of Ubercharge and not just because of its core statistics, but in case you don't like that, I will just add that the whole idea of healing stream attached to Patient was very much popularised by Medic and has been seen through many FPS still to this day. And for our honourable mentions with Medic, we're going to do a bit of a package deal for the first two, as we're going to be covering the meta, those being the Uber Saw and of course the crossbow. The Medic meta has been burnt into everybody's skull, and that's why it is so iconic. All three of these weapons are the most used Medic weapons, and there is pretty good reason for each and every one being there. And finally, for our last honourable mention, I'm going to throw in a quick fix, as this was the basic idea of what another Medigun could look like for a very long time, even though it has fallen off in recent times.
Say goodbye to your kneecaps, chucklehead. Boink!
More so than any other class, I feel a lot of Scout's weapons fall into the infamy category, as the trend with most Scout weapons is that when they're added to the game, they're insanely overpowered, and then they get nerfed and no one ever talks about them. However, there has been one Scout primary that has been the consistency of annoying and hard to deal with, and that is of course number 2, the Force of Nature. The Force of Nature is Scout's most iconic weapon because it encompasses his entire personality fully. It's loud, it's fast, it's annoying, it's bad at tennis, and it's full of holes. There are other weapons that accentuate parts of its personality, like for example his bats coming from his love of baseball, yet nothing truly encompasses absolutely everything, just like the Force of Nature's playstyle does. This was one of the choices I had in the honourable mentions and was not considering for the top slot, yet my community fully talked me into it, and the more I thought about it, I 100% agree with them. Our first honourable mention goes to the stock bat, one of the least used stock melees I'm pretty sure, but at the same time a pretty good encompass of what Scout is. Our second honourable mention goes to the stock scattergun, as it is the consistent pinnacle of consistency. Regardless of what you prefer, to all Scout mains, I'm pretty confident in guessing that this is the weapon that made you a Scout main. And our last honourable mention goes to the bonk. Just the sheer idea of bringing a soda can to a gunfight is insanely funny, yet at the same time it's also a very easily accessible canned drink for lots of Gmod and SFM animators, so it gets a lot of representation within animation.
Maybe your colleagues will send a man next time.
Spy ended up at the end of the list, as I have a feeling that this will be one of the more contended choices, yet I have 100% confidence when I say that I believe Spy's most iconic weapon is number 2, the stock knife. Now I say contended because I have a feeling lots of people are going to be mentioning the Ambassador, or the Kunai, or maybe even the Disguise Kit, but I had already discredited the Disguise Kit, and the Ambassador sure is a very iconic weapon for Spy, but it just doesn't hold a candle to the stock knife, for one simple reason. And I'm just gonna dim the lights here to explain this one a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to address directly all the Spy mains currently watching. Okay, hi Spy mains, hi. You 100% own a Balisong in real life, or you own a haircomb version, or you own a training version. You 100% own one, and there is a very, very low chance you own an Ambassador. Hell, I mean, even I have one, and I'm not a Spy main at all. I'm fairly certain you had never heard of a Balisong before TF2, and now I'm pretty confident, if you are a Spy main anyway, that you are considering owning one. However, I have to give the disclaimer, if you are going to get one, please get a training one, or please get a haircomb one, please do not get a real knife one. That is just a terrible idea. And take that from someone who comes not too far from London. The first honourable mention, of course, has to be the Ambassador. I brought it up earlier as I feel this will be some people's number 1 choice for the most iconic spy weapon, but I disagree with that. The second honourable mention belongs to the Sapper. Now, this choice was not mine at all. I would have put one of the Invis watches here, but my community heavily insisted upon it, and I think the reason for that is that the majority of them are engineer mains, so Sappers are something they are going to be running into constantly. And for the final honourable mention, a bit like just how I did with the Charging Targe, I decided to only choose one watch, and of course I had to go with the Dead Ringer. If the word crutch was ever invented for anything, well, this is the weapon that people like to throw that word onto. I don't really think it's a crutch, but this is certainly one of the most iconic weapons in TF2. However, none of these weapons we've covered so far have been the most iconic. There is one more weapon, I think, that is more iconic than all of these things combined. And if you were watching earlier on in the video and were screaming at the screen that I've missed a certain weapon, then I think you know which one it is.
Let the games begin!
Let me first apologise for how long this video ended up being. I've been working on this for several weeks, and I guess that's just been reflected in its runtime, so I'm very sorry about that. But anyway, without further ado, we've covered lots of iconic weapons this list, and I might have missed out a very big one that some of you were screaming at me for, and you may or may not have seen it in the thumbnail, but I believe the most iconic weapon in TF2 is number 1, the Sandwich. What else could come close? The Sandwich is the pinnacle of everything that a TF2 weapon should be. Humorous, effective, full of meat, and unique, and I just think overall the Sandwich sums up entirely what TF2 is. Looks silly, sounds silly, plays amazing. And with all this being said, there are still people out there who say Heavy has no personality. Now, I'm actually going to do a few honourable mentions for this as well, and the first one you might be thinking of is the Golden Frying Pan. I have chosen the Sandwich over the Golden Frying Pan purely because of its accessibility. Everybody has a Sandwich, nobody has a Golden Frying Pan. I guess the second honourable mention would just be the normal pan. I know it's a promotional item, and no, I don't discredit that from the list, but still, the normal pan is nowhere near as iconic as the Sandwich, and if I were to make a third honourable mention, it would be the stock wrench, as I previously mentioned. And that will do it for now. Thank you so much to everyone for watching. This video really took it out of me. I'm not saying I'm getting close to burnout, but I'm getting close to burnout, and a really, really high effort video that took multiple weeks to make was probably not the best choice, but oh well, expect the next video to be something a little bit faster. But apart from that, thank you very much everyone for watching, have a good one, and I will see you later down the sunny road.